Hey guys, welcome back to another Champion First Impressions video. It's been a while since the last one. I believe Cassante came out back in November, and we're already well into March of 2023. Can't believe this year is already a fifth of the way done. I'm actually feeling really excited about a new champion after taking a look at him, mostly because they seem to have drawn very clear lines in the sand and respected those constraints when designing him. It's also the first true male Enchanter in the game, since Tarek is a hybrid between a Warden and Enchanter, and I love the golden fireballs he plays around with, so I'm already pretty optimistic about this one. Let's not waste any more time and get right into the next episode of 200 Years or Well Designed, featuring Milio, the Gentle Flame. So the idea of a male Enchanter has been on the back burner for quite some time, and while it wasn't as high in demand, seeing as how Riot is trying to include more diversity and representation in League, that was one box they haven't formally checked off yet. Additionally, as I'm sure you're aware, there has been an overabundance of Slayer-type champions. Out of the past 10 newest releases, 6 of them belong to either the Assassin or Skirmisher subclass. Subtlety and favoritism is not their forte, it seems. For once, it would be nice for a new champion to not shred your health bar to pieces. In fact, the new releases I enjoyed the most were the non-Slayers like Vex, Renata, and Rel. Enchanters follow a litany of rules as their class explicitly highlights what its members are supposed to do. They're supposed to enable allies and hinder enemies through non-combative means, or basically they exert pressure through ways outside of damage. Some may opt for a more proactive approach, such as Karma, Renata, or Senna, whose movements cater more towards either dealing damage or disrupting enemy momentum, while others are more reactive, prioritizing the safety of their team instead, like Janna, Soraka, and Lulu. However they choose to apply their pressure is then divided into two subcategories, healing or shielding. Defensive enchanters tend to do both, while offensive supports only do one. Milio is ostensibly a reactive/defensive enchanter. His MO revolves around enabling his teammates by augmenting their existing pressure and mitigating enemy pressure. But like any new champion, what separates him from his predecessors is, of course, his unique mechanic or gimmick. Fortunately for us, it's a rather niche one, and nowhere near as degenerate as the likes of Yuumi. His passive is your Garden Variety support passive. Fired up, empowers an ally champion's next instance of damage to deal bonus magic damage on hit and then apply damage over time for 2.5 seconds. Despite being a reactive enchanter, he should still have some form of DPS enhancement, otherwise players are not going to want to use him. Coordinated passives are definitely the right way to go. It's the same thing as Renata's Leverage, where if she and a nearby friendly attack the same target, they take bonus max health damage. I think the reason they've been putting more emphasis on the whole tag combo motif is because they don't want a repeat of Pike Mid, which I'm all for. What's interesting is that the bonus damage is directly correlated with the ally champion's AD. This raises an interesting question. Would Milio be significantly more effective if his team had more AD champions? I would say yes, mostly because at later ranks it becomes 50% of their total AD, and when you hit late game, most physical damage dealers will have well over 300. It's going to take empirical data for us to know if he's overly reliant on his team composition, but that can work for or against him. For the time being though, let's move on to his Q. Ultra Mega Fire Kick checks off the obligatory damaging ability box, but it has a very interesting interaction. Milio rolls a fireball in a straight line that knocks back the first enemy hit before bouncing forward and exploding in a circle, damaging and slowing all enemies. I find this interaction to be a bit strange, but it makes sense. Given it knocks away enemies, that confirms Milio's job of being a reactive enchanter. He could use Ultra Mega Fire Kick as a poke tool, but it appears to be more effective as a kiting tool, not so much for pursuit, and with the bouncing effect, that makes it somewhat easy to avoid or sidestep for non-primary targets. My main concern with this Q is that it feels like a strictly worse version of Janna's Howling Gale. It does a crap ton of damage, especially with that AP scaling, but when you think of all the other enchanter Qs, this sorta looks a bit underwhelming. Then again, Milio's passive has the potential to deal a ton of damage, so perhaps it's not a bad thing for him to be lacking in offensive pressure elsewhere. Curiously, the impact explosion is bigger if the primary target is not a champion, which may imply it's a solid lane harass tool, but my god that cooldown is long, 12 seconds. Once again, numbers may be subject to change, but I think that needs to be reduced. One more thing to make note of is how big the slow is, 60% base plus 5% per 100 AP. Continuing on, Cozy Campfire has to be one of the most unique supportive abilities I've ever seen, and I love it. For 6 seconds, he spawns a campfire zone that regenerates the health of all friendlies standing within it and grants them bonus attack range. That's a new one. I'm actually surprised it took Riot this long to create a healing zone champion. We have Janna's Monsoon, which comes close, but I was mostly referring to a stationary spot on the ground that you can camp out at. No pun intended, but the caster can still move around freely, kinda like a Kindred ultimate. Once again, the idiosyncratic nature of this ability raises a ton of questions. Unlike other enchanters who give more conventional stats like attack damage or attack speed, Milio gives attack range. More importantly, he gives base attack range, so rapid fire cannon or lethal tempo will be extra effective when paired with this. It's clear he was meant to play with a specific kind of team. Passive scales off total AD, and W gives more attack range. Something tells me he's going to be run often with your ranged top laners like Quinn, Kayle, and Vayne, marksman junglers like Graves and Kindred, or ADC mids like Tristana and Doc Shun. I wonder how Milio's Campfire works for someone like Rengar though. Does it augment his jump range, or does it only increase his base attack range before being enhanced by his passive? Now you guys know I'm not a fan of ranged top laners, being a top laner myself, but I like how Milio knocks on a very particular door that hasn't been explored yet. To be honest, I was growing increasingly bored of every enchanter providing healing, shielding, buffing, and poke damage when they released Yuumi, Seraphine, and Senna. Renata was an improvement, but it still felt like that. Milio may provide shields, heals, and poke damage, but at least he offers a niche perk that incentivizes you to keep him as a pocket pick if you find your team stacking ranged AD champs. I also like that he's allowed to reposition into follow an allied champion, so there's a degree of flexibility in placement and you don't have to lock yourself into one spot. I also like how it's a gradual regeneration, forcing his team to spend a good amount of time in the campfire if they want to make the most of it, as opposed to other enchanters who just insta-heal. But of course, it wouldn't be an enchanter with that good old shielding, and that's what Warm Hugs is for. It's a targeted point-and-click shield and movement speed buff, and he can store 2 charges of it at a time. It appears to also stack if you layer both charges of E on a single person. On one hand, I can concede that he's entitled to something a bit less quirky, what with how his Q and W are very unique. But if they were going to continue the trend of unconventional stuff, they could have whipped up something for Warm Hugs, I think. Now, before we get into his ultimate, I have one small nitpick. In regards to his background, Milio has a bunch of fireball friends, which are apparently called fuemicos, which in Spanish literally translates to fire friend. I sort of expected there to be a bit more emphasis on the usage of that fire, but so far the only ability that makes use of the individual fireballs is Q. Cozy Campfire does have a fireball at the center of it, but his W and E don't necessarily illustrate his control over soothing flames. Might just be how I see it, but I was under the impression that Milio would play out like Bard or maybe Heimerdinger and base most of his interactions around his companions. Either that or they're more for creative flair than actual usage. To clarify, I like the premise of his kit so far. The simplicity in his design is refreshing after all the crazy new champs he had in the past. I know I always say that whenever a new champion comes out whose ability descriptions aren't college theses, but if anything, Milio's a testament to how you can make a very distinctive champion and playstyle without having to feature creep the hell out of it, but let's keep going. His ultimate Breath of Life is a mixed bag for me. Functionally, if and when used correctly, it can dramatically alter the outcome of a teamfight to the point where I might even call it a super ultimate. Very simple, all allied champions in a wide radius including him are healed and cleansed of all non-displacement crowd control and then get 65% tenacity for 3 seconds. Milio is the first champion in League of Legends history to have a built-in Mikhail'S Crucible type ability, although I should mention that he can't use it to cleanse himself out of hard CC the way Gangplank, Olaf, or Alistar can. Even so, this is huge. Picture Annie going flash tibbers on your entire team only for Milio to press ult and boom, it's like it never happened. Crowd control is often the only reason a team wins or loses a fight. Think of all the moments where someone got caught from a crucial Morgana binding or long-range Ash arrow that all but decided the game. Milio cancels all of that out with the press of a button. Honestly, I feel like even if they took out the healing and made his ultimate only the cleanse but with a lower cooldown, it would still be a phenomenal ability. It's one thing if it could work only on a single ally, but it can work on his entire team. And the 65% tenacity renders crowd control effectively useless going forward. That being said, it's still situational. Obviously, if the enemy team consists of Fiora, Kha'Zix, Aurelion Sol, Kai'Sa, and Blitzcrank, Milio's ultimate is an infinitely worse version of Soraka's. But if the enemy team consists of Shen, Amumu, Veigar, Ashe, and Renata, Milio might actually be the single greatest counterpick champ to ever exist, and that's ultimately what I think he's gonna be, a counterpick. The nature of his abilities forces him to be picked only against a specific type of enemy team and specific type of ally team. Again, this is purely theoretical. For all I know, maybe Milio is a good champ no matter who is on what team. But considering how 3 of his abilities, passive, W, and ultimate, have very specific buffs or applications that are rendered practically non-existent if said applications are not present, I think it's almost obligatory for Milio to be paired up with the right teammates and faced against the right enemies, which brings me to my overall thoughts on the character. I love his kit. Milio has to be one of the most thoughtfully designed champions I've seen in a very long time. For those who followed me for a while, you'll know that my perspective on champion design greatly revolves around constraints, boundaries that not only serve to give you direction and guide you to your goals of making them, but to also prevent you from overscoping and straying away from the original intent of the champion. The past few years of League have been littered with instances of Riot ignoring design constraints and overloading a champion, whether intentional or by accident. In an effort to distinguish newer champions from their predecessors, Riot added a ton of crazy effects, mechanics, and gimmicks, as well as tried to hybridize them by allowing them to do more things, Akshan being a marksman and assassin, Cassante being a warden and skirmisher, Pike being an assassin and catcher, or Yona being a skirmisher and assassin to name a few. Coincidentally, many of these overloaded new champions are members of the Slayer class, known for equally high mobility and DPS, and a significant contributor to the high damage one-shot meta we've been in ever since I would say 2018. Something to make note of is that among those 200 years champions, the ones who were well received were those who properly adhered to their established constraints. Vex was a burst mage engineered as a response to high mobility enemy team compositions. Renata was an enchanter designed as a high risk high reward burst counter, proficient at dealing with enemy teams with high DPS champions. In the case of Milio, it's gonna be a lot less likely that he'll fall out of control because they picked a lane and stuck to it. When it comes to supports in League, I think a mistake they made was having them be too generic, particularly in the enchanter department. There are mild nuances between them, but overall, what distinguishes enchanters is mostly how strong their numbers are. On a surface level, Lulu, Nami, Sona, Janna, Seraphine, Yuumi, they're kind of interchangeable. I think it would have been a lot more noteworthy if every enchanter specialized in something, so that way it would add more tactical significance to how a support is picked. I understand that supports are supposed to be flexible given they're usually picked first, and it's unreasonable to expect a top jungle, mid, and AD carry to know the ins and outs of every support. But all the more reason why my first impressions of Milio are very positive. He's an easy character to digest, both to the ones playing him and also to the rest of his team. He still provides you with your bread and butter heals and shields, but to make the most of him, you need to have a team comp centered around ranged auto attackers. In my opinion, this is the right way to create new champions. To make them stand out, you should give them a niche that is universal enough for them to be consistently played, but incentivizes and rewards you for picking them specifically for that. Rel is a vanguard whose true value demands a team of hard engagers like Yasuo and Samira. Given her go big or go home nature, she's a more extreme version of Alistar, Leona, etc. But the payoff can be measurably greater than her peers if you have the right team. Renata is an enchanter who punishes the enemy team for having either way too much DPS or relying on kill reset abilities such as Pike or Darius. I'm glad they're making a concerted effort to create supports who are more situational because it creates a new layer of balance that actually helps them remain stable. I have a feeling Milio's gonna be one of those champs who doesn't get buffed or nerfed a whole lot because like I said before, he doesn't splash into every team comp as efficiently. That was the whole issue with Yuumi and why they reworked her. The range of stats and buffs provided by her were abusable by too much of the cast. The one downside to him is that there might be a lot of really unintended stupid interactions that stem from Cozy Campfire. I'm not certain to what extent the increased attack range buff will affect a ranged champion's performance. For all we know, it might not even make that much of a difference. Obviously with this type of ability, it's at its most dangerous when playing the neutral game. But increasing an attack range of 550 to 660 won't really make that much of a difference. Most dash abilities are 600 to 700 range anyway. I also am a bit nervous about Breath of Life. I could just be blowing it out of proportion, but there's a reason people call it the QSS tax because it's so expensive. Being able to cleanse any and all non-airborne crowd control, including suppress, on a support feels almost too overpowered. At the very least, with how simple his abilities are, fixing him will be a classic case of numbers. If his lane pressure is too high, then you can nerf his passive to scale less in the early game, then ramp up in the mid game or nerf the AP ratio on Ultra Mega Fire Kick. If Breath of Life is making late game teamfights too forgiving, then you can lower the 65% tenacity to, 35. I seriously doubt Milio will become a balanced nightmare. All in all, I'm really pleased with how they conceptualized him. I think it's a neat idea to release a support that can boost attack range and cleanse crowd control. To repeat, this is mostly first impressions. We'll see how crazy or mellow he is once he makes it to live servers. 9 out of 10 champion for me. I don't think I gave a rating like that in a very long time. I would have given him a 10 if Warm Hugs wasn't so generic, but enchanters aren't meant to be mechanically difficult to play. That defeats the purpose of the class. Anyways, gonna stop rambling. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter at Vars, joining my Discord server, and checking out my other first impressions videos if you haven't yet. But for now, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon in the next one. Take care.